You know, I'm gonna say something I never thought I was going to say. Last year was a good year for Isekai. As someone who's been invested in the anime community for the last 15 years or so, Isekai isn't a genre I've been particularly fond of as of recently. It's a genre I originally loved, and also one I personally watched slowly devolve into generic themes of escapism and fantasy. So naturally, as Isekai grew in size and continued not to show any development in the genre, I grew distant from the genre itself. But I'm a nostalgic old man, and as an early adopter of the genre, I made it my personal goal to watch at least one Isekai each season to both keep my expectations for other anime in check and to see if maybe I can find some new life slowly emerging in the genre. And 2021 was just that. Finally, a breath of fresh air into Isekai. So let's start by talking about the winter 2021 season. This season we had Slime Season 2, which was frankly great. Now, Slime was already established by this point as one of the better Isekai anime coming out originally in fall 2018. But Season 2 of this anime, ironically enough, pivoted away from power fantasy and explored the side of city building. Yes, Rimuru was still an overpowered monster. However, he was almost kind of put into check in this season as he finally puts himself into situations where the answer isn't always brute force. I took note of this season because it took a pretty interesting twist where instead of him just brute forcing everything, he has to be political and think of what's best for his country, and most importantly, he makes some pretty big mistakes that he pays dearly for. This season also saw the release of So I'm a Spider, So What?, which originally was going to be my throwaway isekai and ended up not being that. Kumo stole my heart in this anime. It unfortunately does become your classic power fantasy, but Kumo isn't born overpowered, and instead of a training arc that lasts 30 seconds, hers is like 20 episodes long, which you would think would make for a terrible anime, but instead they did such a good job writing her and her multiple personalities that her training arc just makes you fall in love with her. It's a fun, happy show with some random kids that no one cares about thrown in there, but once again took a very different approach to power fantasy. Not making her this god of the world, but instead basically having her run away to save her ass multiple times. Each time she starts getting even slightly comfortable, a new monster appears that is way stronger than her and it tries to kill her. And it kind of makes for a lot of fun back and forth. And the last show we are going to talk about from the winter season isn't actually an isekai, but it is a show that explores the themes of power fantasy. Last Dungeon Kid in a Starter Town. This show took a really fun jab at isekai power fantasy tropes with the main character Lloyd, who is this kid from the Last Dungeon who moves to the Starter Town where he is way overleveled. But since he was considered weak in his old town, he has terrible self-esteem and assumes that he is crazy weak despite being one of the strongest human beings on the planet. The show cleverly keeps it hidden from him on how powerful he is, but the fun trope they joke about the most is how everyone in the world literally revolves around Lloyd. Even the main villain is only a villain because he just wants to see Lloyd be super cool and beat his monsters. It's so stupid and makes for such a great show because of the way it makes fun of power fantasy anime and how it seems like everyone inexplicably worships the main character of isekais despite only knowing them for a few seconds and being, frankly, quite bland. Spring brought along two very good isekai. How Not to Summon a Demon Lord Season 2 is a really good anime, but unfortunately, it is pretty formulaic in its themes of escapism and fantasy, so for the sake of this video, we will be skipping it. However, Combatants Will Be Dispatched was definitely a bit of a different isekai because it's not actually a power fantasy. The show does take place in a fantasy setting, and technically speaking, the characters could be classified as overpowered, but ironically enough, the show greatly limits their capabilities due to them not being evil enough, and on top of it, the main characters aren't NEETs from another world, but military personnel with the objective to conquer the world and then return with very real consequences back home. Which, despite this show being a lighthearted comedy, it is in stark contrast to what most isekai are like and manages to still be entertaining and fun. I think this show is a really good sign of isekai branching out and not relying solely on a power fantasy trope, or frankly, even escapism. The show is just a raw, idiot comedy with some harem elements that just happens to be an isekai, which is pretty cool. Summer brought Moonlit Fantasy, which is a more traditional isekai, but once again, we are seeing shows take steps away from traditional power fantasy. The main character is overpowered, of course, but fails to save a lot of lives and kind of gets overwhelmed with both discrimination and dread. It's something that isn't explored often in isekai, and the way the show was originally set up, I didn't expect it to be something that was going to be explored in this show, but nevertheless, they did, and it turned out great. And finally, fall 2021 brought the final show I need to discuss. Mushoku Tensei is known as one of the founding fathers of modern isekai, and for good reason. The show is far from bound by the typical themes of escapism and fantasy. Rudius is far from an overpowered individual and suffers a great deal of PTSD, not only from his previous life, but even some newfound PTSD he's gained in his new life. The show is truly changing the isekai genre in ways that I can't properly describe in under 2 paragraphs. But what I can say is that this show is different and forces change in the genre. It screams that it is not acceptable to write cookie-cutter characters in a fictional world and have them prance around like it's their own little playground. Isekais need to have drama, character development, flaws, and life lessons. The show takes the time to make sure that you know that Rudius isn't exactly a good guy, completely innocent and friendly, but it's okay because people can change and learn, and Rudius, along with everyone else, has to go through a process. This previous year's isekai has taken multiple steps in turning down the power in power fantasy. Even in anime where characters seem to have unlimited power, writers have taken the liberty to more or less kick their protagonists while they are down and show them how harsh the world can be even for the most powerful of individuals. This is a good change. Modern isekai needs to evolve if it wishes to stay relevant, and it looks like last year was the year when these changes have finally hit the anime industry. Sure, there were definitely a few traditional isekai last year, but none of them were massive hits. Whereas more unique isekai are starting to really take root and prove that most viewers want something different. They want something with character development, with consequences, with meaning. Isekai is changing, and that is a good thing. Thank you for watching.